As soon as Trump left, Putin showed up right after. Once Putin left, Xi Jinping hurried to Pyongyang. What kind of game are these big players really playing? According to a May 21st report from Yonhap news agency, citing high-level intelligence from the South Korean government, Xi Jinping could visit North Korea to meet Kim Jong-un as early as next week. As soon as the news broke, media outlets around the world went wild. Some say Xi's acting as a messenger for Trump to push for renewed US-North Korea talks. Others say he's going to encourage Kim Jong-un to play the nuclear card. And there are those who think it's just routine diplomacy and nothing to make a fuss about. I don't completely agree with any of these three explanations. In fact, there are at least 6 layers of calculation behind Xi Jinping's visit to North Korea. Let's take a look at the world together. Hello everyone, I'm Chenwei Yu. Today, we're going to look at the big picture, the interconnected relationships between China, the US, Russia, Japan, North Korea, South Korea, and Taiwan. Even though it sounds a bit complicated, I'll do my best to explain it clearly and simply. As always, my perspective on the world is just a little bit different. If you want to know how I see things, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, or just visit my homepage for the latest episodes. First, let's confirm the facts. According to a report by Yonhap news agency, senior officials in the South Korean government say they have obtained intelligence that Xi Jinping is about to visit North Korea. The earliest possible time is the end of this month, and the latest would be early June. So how credible is this information? There are 3 concrete signs that make it seem like this is more than just a rumor. First, Wang Yi already went ahead in April to pave the way. He's the Chinese foreign minister. In April this year, Wang Yi visited Pyongyang, where Kim Jong-un personally received him and specifically expressed a desire to strengthen high-level exchanges. In diplomatic circles, this kind of arrangement follows a set logic. The foreign minister goes first, then the leader follows. This is almost a standard procedure with very few exceptions. Second, Xi Jinping's advanced security team has already entered Pyongyang. This is the hardest sign to fake. When a head of state visits another country, security personnel and honor guards must arrive at the destination ahead of time to scout and set up security. What the South Korean intelligence agencies have picked up is exactly this development. Third, in 1961, China and North Korea signed the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance. This year happens to be the 65th anniversary. There's a very special clause in this treaty. If North Korea is attacked, China is theoretically obligated to send troops to assist. The 65th anniversary provides a naturally reasonable diplomatic reason. Since they're already going, it makes perfect sense to celebrate an anniversary as well. No one can really object to that. So how did Beijing respond? When Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun was asked about it, he simply said there's currently no information to share. Then he added, China and North Korea are good friends and close neighbors who have always maintained friendly exchanges. I know a lot of people, when they hear this kind of diplomatic language, their minds just automatically tune out. But actually, if you translate it, it's pretty simple. I can't confirm it, but I'm not denying it either, so keep guessing. The trickiest thing about Beijing isn't what they say, but what they deliberately leave unsaid. Sometimes keeping the whole world guessing is a bargaining chip in itself. Let's clear up a common misconception first. The most widely circulated rumor is that Xi Jinping went to Pyongyang to deliver a message for Trump to restart US-North Korea talks. I don't agree with this theory because there's a fundamental logical flaw here. Trump and Kim Jong-un have one thing in common. Neither of them likes to communicate through intermediaries, especially Trump. With his personality, if he really wanted to talk to Kim Jong-un, then he can't be bothered to go through other people. Just think back to history. From 2018 to 2019, during Trump's first term, the US-North Korea summits were held in Singapore and then in Hanoi, Vietnam. Even more dramatic was in June 2019, when Trump walked to the South Korean side of Panmunjom, called out to the north, and Kim Jong-un actually came out. The two of them shook hands directly in the demilitarized zone. Trump even stepped onto North Korean soil, becoming the first sitting US president in history to set foot in North Korea. With someone who operates like that, do you really think he needs Xi Jinping to go all the way to Pyongyang to deliver a message for him? Also, after the Trump-Xi meeting, the White House released a fact sheet that did mention both leaders reaffirm their shared goal of North Korea's denuclearization. But when China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs later responded to reporters, they deliberately avoided using the words North Korea denuclearization and only said that China has always played a constructive role on the Korean Peninsula issue. This subtle difference in wording actually says it all. What does constructive role really mean? To put it bluntly, it means keeping the issue alive so that China remains indispensable. Beijing doesn't truly want to solve the North Korea problem. What it needs is for the North Korea issue to always hang there, to be a card it can hold but never play. So why did Xi Jinping go to Pyongyang? To answer that, we have to look at several major events that have happened in the past few weeks. To understand why Xi Jinping went to Pyongyang this time, we first need to clarify what just happened between him and Putin. On May 19th, Putin arrived in Beijing for a 2-day state visit, and the occasion was extremely grand. Putin brought with him 5 deputy prime ministers and 8 ministers, the entire delegation. A 39-person entourage, such a lineup is rarely seen in recent years. Everyone on the outside thought that this time they would finally seal the deal on the Power of Siberia 2 natural gas pipeline. How many years has this pipeline been under discussion? More than 6 years. Every meeting they say there's been substantial progress, but after every meeting, the agreement still isn't signed. It's like when people keep saying it's almost done, but nothing ever actually happens. In the end, even after Putin left Beijing on the 20th, the pipeline agreement still hadn't materialized. The issue is stuck. So where's the problem? It's the price. Sources at Gazprom told Bloomberg that the Russian side has already offered a very attractive price, but the Chinese side hasn't shown any willingness to move the project forward at all. Why? Because the price Beijing wants is just too aggressive. According to the Financial Times, Beijing wants to buy natural gas at a price close to Russia's domestic market rate. That's about $50 per 1,000 cubic meters. Right now, China pays $258 per 1,000 cubic meters for natural gas imported from other pipelines. In other words, Beijing is asking Russia for more than a 50% discount. Basically, a discount on top of a discount. This price is about 12 times lower than the current natural gas price quoted in Europe. The Financial Times, citing sources familiar with the matter, said that Russia refused to sign the deal precisely because of this condition put forward by the Chinese side. From Russia's perspective, it's almost unreasonable. To put it bluntly, what Beijing wants isn't just natural gas. It's natural gas for free. Of course, Putin isn't going to go for that. So why is Xi Jinping making such an unreasonable demand? There's a very practical truth in business. The more eager you are to sell, the less eager the other side is to buy. Right now, Russia is in a hurry because after the Russia-Ukraine war broke out in 2022, Europe made up its mind to get rid of its dependence on Russian energy. Putin lost his biggest market just like that. After Europe closed its doors, Russia realized that its bargaining power in the Eastern market was nowhere near as strong as it had imagined. Meanwhile, China has plenty of sources for natural gas imports: Australia, Qatar, Malaysia, and more. Plus, with Xi Jinping currently, he's also short on cash, so of course he wants to take advantage of Putin while he can. After Putin left, Xi Jinping immediately turned around and headed to Pyongyang. This arrangement isn't a coincidence. I know that when many people hear about China-North Korea relations, what comes to mind are phrases like comrades and brothers or as close as lips and teeth, but the real nature of China-North Korea relations is much more complicated and much more interesting than that. Let me take you back through some history. In 1950, the Korean War broke out. The Chinese Communist Party sent troops to aid North Korea, fought for 3 years, and sacrificed hundreds of thousands of volunteer soldiers. Only then did the Kim dynasty manage to survive. Since then, Beijing has always believed that the Kim family owes them a huge favor. But the problem is, Kim Il-sung was never Beijing's puppet. During the Cold War, he played both the Soviet Union and China against each other, taking money from the Soviets and security guarantees from China. Kim Il-sung took benefits from both sides, but never fully listened to either. Later, when Sino-Soviet relations soured, he became even more skilled at exploiting that rift to maximize his own strategic space. In 1992, China established diplomatic relations with South Korea. Beijing, for its own economic interests, leaned towards Seoul. Kim Il-sung was furious, feeling utterly betrayed by his ally. From that point on, a deep rift formed in China-North Korea relations, though on the surface, they continued to maintain the image of being brothers. After Kim Jong-un came to power, what was the first major thing he did? He executed his uncle, Jang Song-taek. Jangsongtek was the most important bridge for North Korea's economic relations with China, and to some extent was seen by outsiders as Beijing's channel of influence in Pyongyang. By killing him, Kim Jong-un sent a very clear message: Beijing has no right to meddle in Pyongyang's affairs. American scholar David Shambaugh, when studying China-North Korea relations, once said something I think is spot on. China-North Korea relations are a kind of coerced alliance. Both sides feel they need each other, but neither trusts the other, and both are looking for ways to escape the other's control. With this background in mind, let's look at Xi Jinping's visit to Pyongyang today. He's not going to visit a docile, obedient ally, but rather one who, behind a smiling face, is always ready to bite back at any moment. Now that we've covered the background, let's talk about Xi Jinping's first calculation for this visit to North Korea. In recent years, Kim Jong-un has been getting closer and closer to Russia. North Korea has been supplying artillery shells to Russia and even sending soldiers to Ukraine. They've exchanged military technology and foreign currency for fighting on the front lines in Ukraine. Kim Jong-un even personally called Putin, saying that Pyongyang will always stand with Moscow. North Korea and Russia have already signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty, and their military cooperation is getting deeper and deeper. So how does Beijing feel about all this? To be honest, they're a bit anxious. If Kim Jong-un gets too close to Putin, China's dominant position on the Korean peninsula might not be so secure anymore. This situation actually reminds me of a bit of Cold War history. In 1961, the Soviet Union broke off relations with Albania. Albania wasn't a big country, just tucked away on the Adriatic coast with limited strategic value, but Mao Zedong immediately stepped in and became Albania's biggest benefactor. Why was that? It wasn't entirely because Albania was so important, but because in the socialist camp, you can't just let your rival snatch away your ally, even if that ally isn't all that valuable. Losing them is in itself a matter of face, a question of who holds the power to speak. Xi Jinping is facing a similar situation today. He and Putin just had some disagreements, and things are still a bit awkward between them. So Xi turned around and went straight to Pyongyang, not just to strengthen ties, but also to send a message to Putin. When it comes to Kim Jong-un, I'll go check things out myself, so don't even think about making a move. Of course, whether Xi can really keep Kim Jong-un on a tight leash is another story, because the Kim dynasty has a history and a genetic instinct for never letting anyone control them. Here's a clue that a lot of people have noticed, but haven't quite connected all the dots. After the Trump-Xi meeting ended, Trump boarded Air Force One to return to the United States, and then the very first thing he did on the plane was make a phone call. Who did he call? Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. This was later confirmed by George Glass, the U.S. ambassador to Japan, who said that after the Trump-Xi meeting, the first foreign leader Trump called was Kishida. Glass said that this fact alone is a symbol of the deep trust in the U.S.-Japan alliance. Afterwards, Kishida told reporters that Trump gave him a detailed account of the Trump-Xi meeting, and the two also reaffirmed the importance of the U.S.-Japan alliance. On the surface, this seemed like a reassuring phone call, because Tokyo was probably full of doubts about the content of the Trump-Xi meeting. Japan had always worried that if Trump got too close to Xi Jinping, he might make concessions on the Taiwan issue or use Japan's strategic interests in the Asia-Pacific region as bargaining chips in exchange for something else. So, this kind of fear actually has a historical name in Japan: the Nixon shock. In 1971, Nixon secretly sent Kissinger to visit Beijing to prepare for opening up U.S.-China relations, but he didn't inform Japan in advance at all. Tokyo was caught completely off guard when the news was announced, and that feeling of being betrayed by an ally and kept in the dark left a deep scar in Japan's diplomatic history. More than 50 years later, Tokyo is starting to feel a similar anxiety again. So how did Fumio Kishida respond? His choice was to pick up the pace and strengthen ties with another neighbor, South Korea. On the same day Trump visited China, May 19th, Kishida flew to South Korea for a 2-day visit. The South Korean side gave him a quasi-state guest reception. Prime Minister Lee Jae-myung personally greeted him at the hotel entrance, there was an honor guard and a military band, and the meeting was even held in Lee Jae-myung's hometown, Ondong, North Gyeongsang Province. This arrangement is significant. In January of this year, Lee Jae-min visited Yoryo, the hometown of Sanai Takaichi. This time, Sanai Takaichi reciprocated by visiting Lee Jae-min's hometown. Japan and South Korea call this shuttle diplomacy, meaning that the leaders of the two countries take turns visiting each other's hometowns. It symbolizes a personal trust that transcends official protocol. This level of intimacy is actually quite rare in the history of Japan-South Korea relations. It's important to remember that Japan and South Korea have a century-long history of grievances, including colonial history, the comfort women issue, and the Dokdo/Takeshima dispute. Every so often, a diplomatic crisis erupts. The fact that the leaders can exchange hometown visits indicates that bilateral relations are experiencing a rare period of warming. Beijing sees this warming very clearly and is very uncomfortable with it. The improvement in Japan-South Korea relations, coupled with the deepening of the US-Japan alliance, is tantamount to a tighter, arc-shaped defense line has formed along the coast, stretching from Yonaguni Island in Japan to Taiwan and Jeju Island in South Korea. If this line were truly connected, the strategic pressure on Beijing would be enormous. This background is one of the important reasons why Xi Jinping decided to personally visit Pyongyang. The Korean peninsula is the only node on this arc-shaped defense line where he can still exert influence. However, one detail is worth mentioning. Takaichi Sanai's visit to South Korea was not without opposition within South Korea. Some South Korean citizens took to the streets to protest Takaichi Sanai's stance on historical issues, believing that she represented the specter of Japanese militarism. The improvement in Japan-South Korea relations is real, but the underlying historical wounds are also real. Beijing is well aware of this, and this gap will always exist. As long as the opportunity is right, it can be manipulated again. After talking about Japan and South Korea, we have to mention Taiwan, because on the very same day that Sanai Takaichi visited South Korea, Trump said something at a press conference upon returning to the US that made Beijing very uncomfortable. A reporter asked him, "Do you plan to call Taiwan's president Lai Ching-te?" Trump said, "I will talk to him. I talk to everyone." Just that one sentence set off a huge diplomatic ripple. Why is that? Because ever since the US broke off diplomatic relations with Taiwan in 1979, it's been almost unheard of, basically taboo, for a US president to speak directly with a Taiwanese leader. The last time this taboo was broken was in 2016, when Trump, just after being elected, spoke with Tsai Ing-wen. Of course, that also caused a huge uproar. This time, Trump said he would call Lai Ching-te, and he repeated this statement on different occasions. Reuters analysis suggests this is not a slip of the tongue, but a deliberate signal. Just today, May 22nd, acting U.S. Navy Secretary Kao Seong admitted at a Senate hearing that the $14 billion arms sale to Taiwan has been suspended, citing the depletion of ammunition due to operations against Iran and the need for the U.S. military to ensure its ammunition reserves are sufficient. However, he added that they actually have sufficient ammunition, making this statement quite intriguing. Trump himself told Fox News that arms sales to Taiwan are a bargaining chip in negotiations with China, so when and how to use this chip is up to him. For Taiwan, they can only wait. The Chinese Foreign Ministry is very concerned about this arms sale to Taiwan, demanding that the U.S. handle the Taiwan issue with extreme caution and stop sending wrong signals to pro-independence forces. Xi Jinping's trip to North Korea is likely due to fear of escalating tensions on multiple fronts involving the Taiwan issue, including the US, Japan, and South Korea. This trip to North Korea is a form of reciprocal threat from the CCP to the US arms sale to Taiwan. At present, the U.S. suspension of arms sales to Taiwan very likely means that Xi Jinping has made some kind of deal with Trump behind the scenes. Xi Jinping has struck some sort of deal with Trump behind closed doors. Many people might have always wondered about this. Is North Korea's nuclear weapons program really a problem that Beijing needs to solve, or is it an asset that needs to be preserved? The answer is the latter. What would happen if North Korea truly denuclearized? The tensions on the Korean Peninsula would decrease, and the US military presence in Japan and South Korea would lose one of its most important justifications. That sounds like a good thing for Beijing, right? But the problem is, a reduction in tensions might not actually benefit Beijing, because maintaining instability on the Korean Peninsula is one of the core tools the Chinese Communist Party uses to maintain its influence in Northeast Asia. More importantly, a denuclearized North Korea would be politically more fragile and more susceptible to external influence, and it could even move toward unification with South Korea. For Beijing, a unified pro-American Korean peninsula would be a geopolitical nightmare, because it would mean that US troops could be stationed right on China's border. So now you can understand why the term denuclearization appears in the joint statement between Trump and Xi. But Beijing's Ministry of Foreign Affairs deliberately avoids using this term, only saying that China has always played a constructive role on the Korean Peninsula issue. What does constructive role mean? It means keeping the problem alive so that China remains indispensable. After the Cold War, Russia created a series of similar situations in the former Soviet regions, conflicts that are never resolved but also never truly ended, like in Georgia. Georgia, Moldova, and the Azerbaijan border all have these kinds of issues that are frozen in midair, preventing the countries involved from ever fully integrating into the Western system, and letting Russia always keeps a bargaining chip for interference. Academically, there's a term for this called a frozen conflict. Simply put, it means the problem is never resolved, but it's also never allowed to truly erupt. Beijing is playing the same game on the Korean Peninsula. Kim Jong-un's nuclear weapons are the core asset of this game. When Xi Jinping goes to Pyongyang, he's not there to persuade Kim to give up his nukes, but to make sure this grenade is still in his own hands, with the pin still firmly held by Beijing. At this point, I want to mention a clue that many people overlook, but in my view, it could be the most strategically significant part of this entire diplomatic chess game. James Mattis, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, accompanied President Trump throughout his visit to China. That might not sound like a big deal, but if you look back at history, you'll see that the last time a U.S. Secretary of Defense accompanied a sitting president on a state visit to China was in 1972, when Nixon visited Beijing. That visit kicked off the entire process of normalizing U.S.-China relations. This comparison was made by an analyst from the South China Morning Post. He might be subtly implying that this is a signal of U.S.-China relations returning to normal. So what does Hegseth's presence mean? It means that this Trump-Xi meeting isn't just about trade in Taiwan. There's also a topic that rarely gets outside attention: the rebuilding of U.S.-China military channels. According to reports, during the summit, both sides discussed nuclear communication mechanisms, military hotlines, and crisis management. These are foundational elements that have long been missing in U.S.-China military relations. Direct communication between the two militaries. The direct lines of communication have been almost completely cut off for several years, and now they're being cautiously rebuilt. What's even more interesting is what comes after Hick's anti-China stance. According to an exclusive report by the South China Morning Post, the Pentagon is planning to send a high-level delegation led by Deputy Secretary of Defense Kahl to Beijing in the coming weeks to pave the way for Hick's own official visit. So who is Kahl? He is the main drafter of the 2026 U.S. National Defense Strategy and a highly representative voice in the American academic community on China strategy. His trip to Beijing isn't just a routine visit. He's going there to discuss substantive issues. If you look at this development alongside Xi Jinping's visit to North Korea, the logic becomes clear. If you want to rebuild military communication with me, if you want to talk to me about the Indo-Pacific strategy, the precondition is that you must acknowledge China's indispensable role on the Korean Peninsula. So Xi Jinping's trip to Pyongyang is actually setting an invisible entry ticket for U.S.-China military dialogue. Whether Hicks goes to Beijing, when she goes, and what will be discussed, we'll keep tracking this development here at YU because it might actually reveal more about the future direction of U.S.-China relations than the Shangri-La dialogue itself. Alright, after talking so much about the external chessboard, let's discuss a perspective that many people overlook: Xi Jinping's own domestic situation. You might find it strange. Doesn't Xi Jinping already have all the power in his hands? What more could he possibly need? Actually, being able to rest easy, being completely worry-free has always just been on the surface. Since the beginning of this year, the economic pressure Xi Jinping is facing is very real. China's real estate market still hasn't recovered from its slump, youth unemployment remains high, and exports have been hit by the trade war. The Xi-Biden meeting? Although some agreements have been reached, whether Sino-US relations can continue to improve remains uncertain. Against this backdrop, Xi Jinping desperately needs a narrative of diplomatic initiative. This is nothing new. Historically, every leader facing domestic pressure has tended to use diplomatic victories to divert attention. This logic is universal, regardless of time or place. A trip to Pyongyang offers several immediate benefits for Xi Jinping's domestic politics. First, Xinhua news agency can publish extensive reports accompanied by large photos of Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un shaking hands, showcasing China's dominant position in major power diplomacy. Second, it can maintain the narrative that China is a guardian of peace on the Korean peninsula, reinforcing China's image as a responsible major power in the international community. Third, and most importantly, it can demonstrate to the party that even at the height of the Sino-US rivalry, Xi Jinping still holds the initiative and can find room to maneuver between major powers. The CCP's political logic, from Mao Zedong to Xi Jinping, has always had one unchanging underlying need: the leader must appear indispensable, and everyone in the party must feel that no one else can handle the situation. A trip to Pyongyang to meet Kim Jong-un is the most direct demonstration of this indispensability. After talking so much about Xi Jinping's calculations, let's discuss what Kim Jong-un himself is thinking. Many people see Kim Jong-un as either a madman or a petty despot manipulated by major powers, but I think both of these views underestimate him. Think about it. How could someone educated in Switzerland, who dared to execute himself upon taking power and challenge every major power, be easily manipulated? Kim Jong-un inherited the survival philosophy of 3 generations of the Kim family, creating tension between major powers, turning himself into an undeniable variable that everyone must court. This strategy wasn't invented by Kim Jong-un. It was gradually developed by his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, during the most difficult years of the Cold War. During the Cold War, Kim Il-sung skillfully navigated between the Soviet Union and China, pleasing both sides and leaving them powerless against him. Even during the most isolated period after his ascension to the throne, Kim Jong-un maintained diplomatic control over Beijing, Washington, D.C., Seoul, Tokyo, and Moscow. Officials have tried to resolve the issue, but none have succeeded. Kim Jong-un's version is an upgrade of this strategy to the nuclear age. He had long ago calculated that as long as he possesses nuclear weapons, no one would dare to truly attack him. Gaddafi abandoned his nuclear weapons program and died at the hands of his own people. Saddam Hussein, lacking nuclear weapons, was captured alive by the US military. These 2 examples are historical lessons that Kim Jong-un will never forget. Therefore, the current situation you see is actually a very advantageous position for Kim Jong-un. China is trying to win him over, Russia is offering him contracts and technology, and Trump has also expressed a desire to meet with him again. With 3 major powers simultaneously involved, it's all good. He sits there waiting to see who offers the highest price. One detail is very telling. This year, Kim Jong-un inspected military-industrial enterprises and publicly declared that by 2026, he would set an unprecedented record in strengthening national defense. This statement wasn't meant for the North Korean people. It was directed at Beijing, Washington, and Tokyo. In plain language, it means, I'm going to keep building weapons, so you all keep bidding. When Xi Jinping visits Pyongyang, he can expect a warm welcome, a smiling photo together, and Kim Jong-un's words about the everlasting friendship between China and North Korea. But can he really keep Kim Jong-un firmly tied to him? Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, was said to have a motto: I will never be anyone's pawn. Kim Jong-un has inherited this trait. Speaking of which, have you noticed that major power diplomacy sometimes resembles a game of mahjong? If one player suddenly gets closer to another, the third player immediately feels tense. In political science, there's a concept called the strategic triangle, which illustrates this principle. When three major actors form a triangular relationship, any change on one side affects the balance of the other two. In 1972, Nixon and Kissinger opened up US-China relations playing on this logic, pulling China from the Soviet Union to a position closer to the US, thus changing the entire Cold War landscape. Today, what we see in Northeast Asia is a more complex, multilateral version. The US and China have just completed a rare high-level dialogue, a tentative easing of tensions. The Sino-Russian relationship appears to have reached an unprecedented level, but in reality, the natural gas pipeline negotiations have stalled, and both sides have their own agendas. Between the US and North Korea, Trump hinted at wanting to see Kim Jong-un again, but there has been no substantial progress. Between China and North Korea, Xi Jinping is poised to overthrow Pyongyang, demonstrating his presence. Between Japan and South Korea, shuttle diplomacy is warming up, and defense integration is quietly progressing. Between the US and Taiwan, Trump stated he would call Lai Ching-te, and $14 billion in arms sales are readily available. In this strategic game, every country is trying to establish more bilateral or multilateral relationships to counter the threats from their rivals. Xi Jinping's visit to North Korea, placed within this framework, has a very clear purpose. At this delicate moment, when Sino-Russian relations are fracturing, Sino-US relations are tentatively thawing, and the Japan-South Korea defense line is quietly consolidating, he needs to stabilize North Korea as a strategic point to prevent Kim Jong-un from leaning towards Russia, while simultaneously sending a signal to the US, Japan, and South Korea that Beijing remains an indispensable party on the Korean Peninsula. Today, Wei Yu will guide you through a comprehensive analysis of Xi Jinping's visit to North Korea from multiple historical, geopolitical, and strategic perspectives. Finally, here's your homework. What do you think was Xi Jinping's main purpose in going to Pyongyang? Tell me in the comments section. A. Filling Putin's gap and consolidating allies. B. Responding to the Japan-South Korea defense line consolidation. C. Using the North Korea card to counter the Taiwan issue. D. Just to make a statement and take a group photo. You can choose multiple options. After the Xi meeting, will Trump really call Lai Ching-te? Will the $14 billion arms sale ultimately be restarted? Will Hexes officially visit Beijing? Kaohsiung has already indicated he will continue to be tough. We'll keep following all these developments and continue analyzing them with you. This is Wei Yu Observes the World. See you next time.